Today, we're going to assess the thesis by Candace Owens that the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, is in reality married to a transgendered female named Brigitte. Candace claims that this boy here, named Jean-Michel Trogneaux, transitioned to female at about the age of 30, assumed the identity of Brigitte, married Emmanuel Macron, and became the First Lady of France.
The person that is living in the Élysée Palace, Brigitte Macron, perhaps, is Jean-Michel Trogneaux. Jean-Michel Trogneaux, who during a transition, the picture that I'm seeing right now, and I'm happy to correct it again because I know you guys are watching at the Élysée Palace, please just answer our 21 questions. Who are you really? And what is your relationship to Emmanuel Macron? What is Emmanuel Macron's relationship to you?
Candace further jolted the internet when she showed these two side-by-side photos of an 18-year-old male named Jean-Michel Trogneaux alongside a photo of France's First Lady, Brigitte Macron.
There were many people who had not previously engaged in the series entirely, but they saw the now infamous side-by-side of the photo of a young Jean-Michel when he was 18 years old, taken at an engineering school, next to the current French First Lady, Brigitte Macron. And they were just kind of jolted into the understanding that something was very wrong. The photographic evidence became instantly, I think, undeniable. One can only come to understand how such a potential identity swap could be feasible if you begin to map out the supporting cast of characters. That's why we took our time here, because you have to understand who is around these people? What is their network? How much power would it take if you did want to create identities or destroy identities? And we've arrived there. We have finally arrived there.
This certainly raised my eyebrows when I first saw it, even though we all know about identical twins and how there is often a strong resemblance among siblings. Nevertheless, the visual impact and framing of this is strong. There is certainly a close resemblance between these two. So I thought I'd dig into this. Candace did a 6-part video series on this, laying out her thesis that President Emmanuel Macron is in fact married to a transgendered female. And Candace's video series is actually 8 parts when we count the prologue and epilogue, for 7 hours of video. And I've linked to all her videos on this in the notes section below so that you can easily watch them and make your own assessment of the case. Now, I want to make it clear here that I'm a huge fan of Candace. She is very smart, incredibly articulate, entertaining, and engaging, which is why she has 4.2 million subscribers on YouTube alone. She's one of the biggest podcasters out there. And her Becoming Brigitte series has 16 million views on YouTube alone as of the recording of this podcast. And I'm sure tens of millions of views across platforms. And I would love it if Candace's thesis is correct, because it would be just such an incredible story and so hilarious. And I'm also someone who just believes that the real world is much stranger than fiction. Much of what goes on in the real world in real life, you could never make up. So I began watching Candace's series with a strong bias in favor of Candace, hoping that Candace really could deliver the goods on this. Because if true, this would also support my broader belief that our government, in particular our CIA and deep state and military-industrial complex, could literally get away with anything. And of course, France and the rest of Europe have their own intelligence agencies and deep state that are every bit as corrupt and evil as our own CIA and deep state. I am also not at all anti-conspiracy theory. Many conspiracy theories turn out to be 100% dead-on accurate. Candace's source for most of her theory is an independent French investigative journalist named Xavier Poussard, who has been the primary editor and writer for a newsletter called Facts and Documents. He specializes in investigating government corruption and elite power networks, such as the Rothschild family banking dynasty, Jeffrey Epstein, the World Economic Forum, and globalist cabals. Let's hear Candace introduce Xavier and then hear Xavier describe himself.
I'm so excited to share with you this interview with Xavier Poussard, the journalist who initially broke the Brigitte Macron scandal via a publication. He did multiple series in it, collaborative work with Natasha Rey, who had helped him. You'll hear about that. Xavier Poussard has never before this moment appeared on camera. He has been remarkably private about his work. He has dedicated years of his life, has dealt with the brunt of what I would describe as a totalitarian government in France coming after him and his family. He has uprooted his family and had to move to Italy to make sure that they were safe and make sure that they were protected. And of course, he is not the only one. But this interview is a culmination of a year worth of work, really a year last year, where I read just the tip of the iceberg and recognized that this was an explosive story. Xavier, I really don't even know where to begin here. I already feel like this is going to be the biggest story of the year, and we're only in January. And so I think just for my audiences and everybody worldwide, just tell us how you got involved in the Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron story, what your background is, and what piqued your interest.
So I got into this subject because I'm interested in press portraits, and that means I specialize in unauthorized press portraits, the sort of things that people might not want somebody to say about them. But I do so with a conscience, and I do so as accurately as possible. So what I do in my job is I archive things. This is what I really enjoy. I like going back into details and back into history and looking at people's problems. I had a bunch of people around me, my contacts in Paris, some mainstream journalists in the media, who were egging me to say things. They said, "Go on, this is what you do." This is what I do. I take information and share it when other journalists cannot. And all of a sudden, I came across someone in my informal work surroundings, and he said, "This is a man. Like, surely you can see this is a man." As if it was the most straightforward, obvious comment he could make about it.
Xavier tends to be more careful than Candace. He tends to stick more carefully to facts and documents, the title of his newsletter, and then tends to let his readers arrive at their own conclusions. When Candace sees a good story or thinks she sees a good story, what she tends to do is take a few bits of possibly interesting information and data points, and from these spin out wild Black Mirror-style stories. And Candace certainly does highlight many creepy facts about the Macrons. For example, Brigitte was a 40-year-old drama teacher when she seduced her 15-year-old theater student, Emmanuel Macron. The official account is that he was 15 years old, but some say 14 years old. In fact, Le Monde, which is France's version of the New York Times, is now saying he was probably 14. And here's 15-year-old Emmanuel Macron kissing his 40-year-old drama teacher, Brigitte. And he looks pretty happy about it. Now, in France, the age of consent is 15. So then the question is, was Emmanuel Macron 14 or 15 years old when this started, when he was seduced by his 40-year-old drama teacher? And all three of Brigitte's children were enrolled in this Catholic school when this was going on. Let that sink in. And in 1994, Brigitte left her husband to be with Emmanuel Macron after 32 years of marriage to Jean-Louise Auziere, with whom she had 3 children. Her daughter Tiphaine was just 10 years old at the time Brigitte left her husband, broke up her family to be with this young Emmanuel Macron. Her other 2 children, daughter Laurence and son Sebastian, were teenagers. Now all this was wild enough. But Candace takes it a step further, many steps further, to make the case that Brigitte is actually a biological male who transitioned to female and then married Emmanuel Macron, who became the president of France, she the first lady. She further suggests that Brigitte might even be President Macron's father, who transitioned and became Brigitte.
These families might all be related. Are the Auzieres, the Trogneux, and the Macrons all just from the same family? Is there a chance that Brigitte Macron, some of you asked, is actually the father of Emmanuel Macron? Now, to be clear, I had never made that statement because I wanted to keep this series factual and to pull away from my gut and to be like Xavier and to only go with the documents and the things that we could confirm. But there is obviously a lot going on here, a lot of evidence which suggests and points to the conclusion that the secret seems to be bigger than just having a transgendered wife, right?
And we'll get into all of Candace's evidence that she thinks supports this in a bit. And my goal here is to state Candace's case absolutely fairly and accurately. And Candace, if you happen to stumble on this podcast, please correct me if you feel that I've misstated your case or any of your evidence. And let me make it clear again that I do not automatically dismiss so-called conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theory is just a pejorative term designed to dismiss the theory outright without bothering to engage with the facts and the evidence. And many conspiracy theories turn out to be absolutely true. I believe that my video series titled How and Why the CIA Killed JFK definitely proves that the CIA killed John F. Kennedy and that Lee Harvey Oswald did not fire a shot. I also believe that my video titled Why LBJ, Why President Lyndon Johnson Killed Martin Luther King proves that President Lyndon Johnson and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover killed Martin Luther King, and that James Earl Ray had nothing to do with the assassination. And my video on the Las Vegas shooter, the Las Vegas massacre, pretty well proves that there was more than one shooter, and that probably Stephen Paddock never fired a shot. And I believe that my video, How the CIA Created Charles Manson, definitively proves that he was a creation of the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program. Same with my video on the Unabomber. MK-Ultra was an illegal CIA program aimed at creating mind-controlled human weapons. Something like what we see in the great 1962 movie, The Manchurian Candidate. And this program to create CIA mind-controlled weapons is not in dispute. There are Wikipedia pages on it. It was uncovered by a Senate investigation led by Senator Frank Church in the early 1970s into the CIA's illegal activities inside the United States. And this MK-Ultra mind control program was supposedly shut down in the early 1970s after it was uncovered. But I assume variations of this program still exist under other names. Candace believes that Emmanuel Macron is a creation of something like the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program because of the way he just seemed to come out of nowhere to win the presidency of France at the age of 39, and because of his peculiar relationship with Brigitte, who is 25 years older than he is, plus a network of sexual deviants who seem to surround the Macrons, according to Candace. Plus, Emmanuel Macron's father, Jean-Michel Macron, who died in 2010, was also a psychiatrist and a professor of neurology, so had the look of someone who might have been involved in France's version of MK-Ultra mind control. That's what Candace thinks. And I absolutely agree with Candace that it sure was interesting how this Emmanuel Macron character just seemed to come out of nowhere to win the presidency of France. And that his wife is 25 years older than he is and seduced him when he was 15 years old, and she was his teacher. And few in the media seem to be raising eyebrows over this. Candace is absolutely right to wonder, how did Emmanuel Macron get elected president of France at the age of 39, never having held elected office before, affiliated with no major political party? Pretty odd. So who is Emmanuel Macron? Well, he formed a centrist party called En Marche in 2016, just 1 year before winning the presidency in 2017, defeating far more prominent figures, including the former Prime Minister of France, François Fillon, who is the odds-on favorite to win. But somehow Macron won, who had never held any elected office before. And what were Macron's qualifications? Well, he studied philosophy in college, got his master's degree in philosophy, wrote his thesis on Hegel and Machiavelli. He then went on to work for a literary publication. He held some pretty nondescript government posts. He was an inspector of finances, which audits government agencies and government spending, a mid-level government bureaucrat, basically. In 2008, he was hired by a Rothschild bank. The Rothschild family is the wealthiest banking dynasty in the history of Europe. And in 2010, at this Rothschild bank, he was promoted to managing partner, a position in which he was earning about $1 million a year. An astonishingly rapid rise for a young philosophy major, who not long before had been working for a small literary publication, and according to his colleagues, didn't know much about finance. One of his colleagues said that Emmanuel Macron, as a managing partner at the most famous bank in the history of Europe, did not know what EBITDA is, which stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Before investing in a stock, I want to know what the company's EBITDA is, which is the operating profit of the company. And Emmanuel Macron, as a managing partner, apparently did not know what EBITDA is. And many of his colleagues expressed dismay at how he was able to rise so quickly at the Rothschild Bank with so little knowledge of basic finance. Macron was not remotely qualified for this position. David Rothschild was moving him up quickly for some reason. Then at the age of 39, Emmanuel Macron comes out of nowhere to win the presidency of France in 2017, having never held elective office before. Emmanuel Macron was also the candidate of the world's second richest man, Bernard Arnault, net worth $150 billion, second richest man behind Elon Musk. So I certainly agree with Candace here. It certainly appears that Arnault and the Rothschilds handpicked Macron and groomed him to run for the presidency of France long before he actually ran. Candace portrays Emmanuel Macron, as something like a Manchurian candidate, a product of something like the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program. And this mind control program was not just designed to turn people into human weapons, but to turn them into human robots who would perform tasks on command or on cue. And Emmanuel Macron certainly was a manufactured candidate. He was the candidate of a cabal of billionaires. But if Macron was a manufactured candidate created and groomed by these multi-billionaires, including the second richest man in the world, they surely would have known that Emmanuel Macron is married to a transgendered woman. They would have done extensive background checks, would have known all about Macron before running him for the presidency of France. So what would be their motive in running someone with such an unconventional spouse, which David Rothschild and Bernard Arnault surely would have known about? Well, I suppose this could have been some kind of complicated joke by these multi-billionaires, some kind of hilarious game being played by bored multi-billionaires for amusement to see if they could get away with such a farce, kind of like the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd.
Pay up, Mortimer. I've won the bet.
Here, $1.
We took a perfectly useless psychopath like Valentine and turned him into a successful executive.
Maybe it's something like that. I decided to head down this rabbit hole with Candace. And I was hoping she was correct. And I watched all of her videos, watched them twice. So let's dig in and see if we can find the truth here. I also have nothing against President Macron. I'm not for Macron or against President Macron. He's well-spoken and appears to be a very nice person. Macron, for the most part, seems to have governed as a centrist in the context of French politics. He's pro-business and pro-free market, leans liberal on social issues. He's exactly what these billionaires, Bernard Arnault and the Rothschilds, want, someone who won't rock the boat. And he might be about the best we can expect in France. Here's Candace's take.
Why are the French people allowing this to happen? How could they allow all of these things to happen? And you're probably wondering how on earth Brigitte and Emmanuel Macron have pulled this off, essentially this mass suppression of the press so that none of us were even aware of all of this weird stuff happening in their country. And I think he's an idiot. He's just a puppet. And he has been groomed from the time that he was a child. But groomed by who? That's why I say this reminds me of the Manchurian Candidate.
And more often than not, multi-billionaires have deep ties to intelligence agencies, which is part of how many of them become multi-billionaires. So that, in summary, is how Emmanuel Macron, was able to come out of nowhere and win the presidency of France. Candace is correct on this. The Emmanuel Macron presidency was a creation of Bernard Arnault, the second richest man in the world, and David Rothschild, the Rothschild family being the most famous banking dynasty in world history. Candace is also correct to say that the propaganda media showed little or no interest in throwing shade on the fact that a 40-year-old teacher seduced her 14-year-old or 15-year-old student, married him, and then went on to become the First Lady of France. In fact, the media tried to spin this relationship as glamorous, romantic, edgy, and sexy. Brigitte was portrayed as the embodiment of modern feminism. And the media spin was basically this: why is it okay for men to have girlfriends and wives who are 25 years younger, but not okay for women to have boyfriends and husbands who are 25 years younger? That was the spin. But of course, that's not the issue. That's a deflection from the elephant in the room. The issue is the age of Emmanuel Macron when Brigitte seduced him, and the fact that she was his teacher, and he was only 14 or 15 years old. That's the issue. And in the media, the ages keep changing in terms of when they met and became a romantic item. At first, the media told us he was 17 and she was 36. Now the official version seems to be that she was 40 and he was 15, but trending now toward 14. He was age 14 in this play here when Brigitte was his drama teacher. And of course, in America, it's a serious felony for an adult to have a sexual relationship with a minor, much less for the adult to be the child's teacher. But in France, the age of consent is 15 because France has a history of being debased and debauched, famous for the Marquis de Sade. So it's very important for the Macron narrative that he was 15, age 15, when he fell under the spell of Brigitte, or this becomes a felony, even in France. But I believe it's a felony even in France for a teacher to have sexual relations with a student who is a minor, because the teacher is in a position of power over her student. Let's hear from Xavier how the media spun the Emmanuel-Brigitte relationship.
And what is the first thing that strikes you as peculiar?
There was an over-mediatization. The mainstream media decided to very strongly attack the other candidates during the 2017 presidential election, and sort of hail and laud everything surrounding Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte. They were even compared to the Kennedys in the French press.
So the propaganda to elect Emmanuel Macron, President of France, was in full force. And of course, Bernard Arnault, the world's second richest man, the fashion king of many of the world's best-known luxury brands like Christian Dior and Louis Vuitton, controls a huge chunk of the advertising budget for the media. He spends billions and billions of dollars on advertising. The media was certainly not going to risk their advertising dollars, billions and billions of advertising dollars from Bernard Arnault, by printing anything negative about Emmanuel Macron. The media will be full partners in pushing Arnault's hand-picked candidate for president. This is how politics works now, not just in France, but here in America and everywhere in the developed world. The candidates are picked by a cabal of multi-billionaires who manipulate public opinion, in part through their control of advertising dollars. And maybe it's always been this way. And many of these multi-billionaires have deep ties to the CIA, to the intelligence agencies, and to the deep state. That's how a lot of them became multi-billionaires. So then how did this idea that Brigitte is transgendered develop? Well, let's hear Xavier explain.
I started talking to my broader network. I started going to everyone I knew, trying to figure out what was going on, because I knew there was a story here, and I wanted to deepen myself within the story. All of a sudden, I get a number from this girl called Natasha Rey. She claims to be able to prove Brigitte Macron is a man. So we begin to exchange ideas and work together for a month. I consider it an interesting question how he's so easy to recognize in this photo. It's because he leaves quite an impression on you. In the second photo, it's the same effect as the first one, where the similarity is so flagrant that I even questioned myself whether there might be some sort of setup. Was this picture provided by a close contact of the Trogneux? I questioned whether they were just manipulating me and the other journalists again.
I mean, it's one of these things where I tell people you just believe your own eyes. That was all it took for me. It's just Brigitte Macron's entire face.
Okay, so all this sounds very intriguing. But then what caught my attention was a photo that Candace shows in her video of Brigitte in her swimsuit on the beach. Looks to me like a distinctly female pelvis and hip structure here. A female's pelvis structure is flatter and wider than a male's pelvis in proportion to body size. Hip sockets for the female tend to flare out, causing female legs to angle inward to the knee. Hip sockets for males tend to angle out less, so legs tend to be more straight up and down. And the male pelvis and hips tend to be narrower relative to body size. And you can see the difference here between how Emmanuel Macron's legs go straight down, Brigitte's angle inward to the knee from the hip socket, the wider hips for females relative to body size, and flared out at the hip socket is of course a structure suited to childbirth. And we can see this with Brigitte. She's so skinny that it can be a little hard to tell. But as a counterpoint, there are also a lot of photos that appear to show Brigitte with legs going more straight down, such as when she's wearing skinny jeans. Tight skinny jeans can present the look of female legs going straight down, especially because the jeans start on or even slightly below the hips. Skinny jeans are designed to create this kind of optical illusion of the legs going straight down. And Brigitte is very thin. But also females can have a narrow hip and pelvis structure, such as with these female Olympic runners and athletes. And I do think that in the final analysis that Brigitte's hip and pelvis structure is distinctly female, not male, even though she's so skinny and it's hard to tell from certain angles. But also Brigitte looks almost identical to her two daughters, Tiphaine and Laurence, especially Tiphaine. They have very similar faces and body types. So these are the first bits of evidence that caught my attention that indicated that something is probably wrong with Candace's thesis that President Macron is married to a biological male transgendered to female. Candace will further theorize that President Macron might, in reality, be married to his father.
Is there a chance that Brigitte Macron, some of you asked, is actually the father of Emmanuel Macron?
And we'll get into how she arrives at this conclusion in a bit. So Brigitte's daughter, Tiphaine, was just 10 years old when Brigitte left her husband of 32 years and broke up the family to be with young Macron. Let's see what Tiphaine has to say about her mom. Tiphaine sticks up for her mom here. Quote, "I learned a lot about human nature. I know that in these moments we must focus on the essential and move forward without taking into account criticism. The attacks, the backbiting, the judgment. It was not yet the era of social networks, but we were in a small provincial town. Everything is known. Despite all this, they stood tall. I gained an open mind, the desire to move forward without listening to all the peripheral noise, and gained a greater tolerance." And Tiphaine goes on, quote, "A family separation can be a sorrow and an opportunity. Recomposition can prove to be an enrichment. I have a beloved father and stepfather." Tiphaine says that the rumors of a forbidden relationship were horrific for all the children. And all Brigitte's kids were students at that time in this school called La Providence, the Roman Catholic high school in Amiens, France, where Brigitte was a drama teacher. So this was horrifically embarrassing for her children. Tiphaine says that claims on social media that Brigitte was born a male have caused a lot of pain. She says, quote, "I have concerns about the level of society when I hear what is circulating on social networks about my mother being a man and the confidence with which it is said." Tiphaine sounds here like an extraordinarily nice person, very well composed, very well spoken. She sticks up for her mom Brigitte and says she deeply values both her father and stepfather. And remember, Candace says that Brigitte is her brother Jean-Michel, who transitioned into Brigitte. So let's dig into the strongest evidence that Candace and Xavier present. First, there's this photo of the Trogneux family. According to the official account, this is Brigitte right here, this little girl here. And this is her brother Jean-Michel here. Candace believes that Jean-Michel, the brother here, is actually Brigitte. And this theory originally came from a woman named Natasha Rey, an independent journalist in France. Natasha Rey made her sensational claims in a video that was posted on YouTube in December of 2021. This was a 4-hour interview conducted by a French medium named Amandine Roy, who has a show on YouTube and other platforms. In her interview, Natasha Rey lays out her thesis that Brigitte Macron is actually a biological male. Natasha Rey's claims got the attention of investigative journalist Xavier Poussard, who started digging into this. And this later got Candace's attention. And much of Natasha's theory stems from her observation that this boy looks a lot like Brigitte. And second, there's this photo, the wedding photo of Brigitte Trogneux to Jean-Louise Auziere on June 22, 1974.
This wedding photo was taken from an announcement which had been published in the local press at the time.
Natasha Rey theorized that the groom in this photo looked a lot more like an uncle of Andre. She posited that the groom in this wedding photo is actually of Jean-Louis, the uncle, not of Brigitte and her first husband, Andre. She also posited that the newspaper announcement of the marriage of Brigitte and Andre was manufactured, was fake. And Candace bought into Natasha's thesis, hook, line, and sinker. Now, I will outline what would appear to most people, to most non-technological people, as the strongest evidence that Candace presents in her 8-part series and 7 hours of video. The French journalist Xavier Poussard presents Candace with the results of facial recognition software called Face++. Let's hear what Candace says about how impressed she is with the accuracy of this facial recognition software.
Xavier Poussard used a technology. I mentioned it to you on last week's episode, or a couple of days ago on the episode, but I want to demonstrate that technology for you, because when he said it to me, my girl brain just sort of went, okay, I'm not into AI, I'm not into tech. But then when he explained to me that this technology known as Face Plus Plus is basically the World Economic Forum's has listed it amongst its 11 smartest companies, okay? It is headquartered in Beijing, China. As I mentioned to you, it is what China uses as their software for facial recognition. And when he showed me how accurate it is, I was positively shocked. I genuinely shocked, amazed, and then terrified about the direction of the world. When you think about these globalists who I believe want to turn us into like sort of these technological slaves, and recognizing that this artificial intelligence is bang on accurate. And so, yes, it's valued at $1 billion from the WF website. It tells us that it was founded in 2011, and it is a leader in machinery, visual, artificial intelligence industry, and face recognition systems. So here's an example, and this is also featured in his book. But I want to point out Kim Basinger there on the right, who has modified her face a lot, okay? It still knows, it is looking and it is saying, yeah, no, that's still Kim Basinger. And it comes back with a percentage and is telling you, essentially, you get into the 75% range, you get above 70%, and it is very high. Like, yes, we are certain that that is her. And it is her. It is accurately her. I'm also going to show you that it is able even to take a childhood photo. And even though that might make it lower or decrease, and you may not get into the 70 range, you may get into the high 60 range, it is still able to tell you that, yes, this is the correct person.
Now, when people hear about AI-guided facial recognition software, this sounds pretty persuasive to most people. People tend to be impressed with high tech. But this company, Face Plus Plus, only has a $1 billion valuation, which is a very small valuation for a tech company. This is nothing like Google, for example, which has a $2 trillion valuation, or Microsoft and Apple, which are $3 trillion companies. Face Plus Plus only has a $1 billion market cap valuation, so Apple and Microsoft are 3,000 times bigger than Face Plus Plus. Face Plus Plus is a tiny tech company in China. And I'll explain in a moment why even Microsoft and Apple's facial recognition technology is no good for this purpose, and why Face Plus Plus is a toy compared to companies like Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. And what Face Plus Plus is actually saying here is that these photos of Kim Basinger has 72% similar features, not that there is a 72% probability that the early photo of Basinger and the more recent post-plastic surgery photo is her. And the 72% number is a number that we would expect from siblings. But let's continue with Candace's reliance on the Face Plus Plus facial recognition software, because this is the crux of Candace's and Xavier's entire case. Their entire case rests on the results produced by Face Plus Plus. Then we will weigh these results against a mountain of counter-evidence and proof refuting what Candace and Xavier believe they are seeing here with these Face Plus Plus readings.
So regarding Brigitte Macron, who has now changed her face, as we learned, the tech returns this way. It tells us that this is a high probability, and this is with dentured teeth, different teeth, right? It is telling us that this is this boy in this school photo, okay? This is this boy in this school photo. It is returning from normal to high, highest being there at 17.3%. And that's just with the school photo and with years of work. Okay, we're not even comparing this to the school photos when she still had the teeth that you see there on the left-hand side, right? When Brigitte still had teeth. This is with a ton of work being done by the magician. And it is still certain that that is Brigitte Macron. Okay, that little boy became Brigitte Macron.
Again, Candace is misreading these scores. The 66 to 72% score generated by Face Plus Plus is a percent of similarity of features between the photos, not a 66 to 72% probability that they are the same people. A 66 to 72% score on similarity of features is exactly what we would expect for siblings. Candace makes a further leap here that Face++ is, quote, certain that these are the same people.
And it is still certain that that is Brigitte Macron, okay? That little boy became Brigitte Macron.
Face++ is certain, she says, even though the app itself is only returning a score of 66 to 72%, which we would expect for siblings. And even though this is not actually a probability score, but is a score on the similarity of features. And Candace is leaping to the conclusion that the software is telling us that there is a certain match here. So because these photos are taken at very different ages, the app is saying there's a 70 or 75% resemblance, which is typical of siblings. Not that there is a 70 to 75% chance that they are the same people. Very crucial to understand what this software is actually measuring. Candace misunderstands what this app is measuring, what it's capable of, and what it's designed to be used for. The Face++ app is not designed to produce a positive or negative result of photos of a person decades apart in age in terms of the photos when the photos were taken, and of photos that are very poor quality. Yes, Face++ is AI-driven, and people are impressed by that, impressed by AI. Everybody's impressed with AI. But the AI must be trained on the subject material to be effective. Face++ AI is optimized for tagging of photos on social media and for facial identity authentication for accessing your digital device, which requires up-to-date, clear photos and live detection. So these scores in their 70s are really not impressive at all, contrary to Candace's belief here. Candace comes back to trusting Natasha Rey's instincts on this when she first saw the photo, plus the results of this Face++ facial recognition software test. And of course, Candace is trusting her own eyes and instincts.
So if you are wondering the answer to why it is that Xavier Poussard has never been sued by the Macron family, what is it exactly that saved Xavier Poussard, whereas the women, Natasha Rey and Amandine Roy, who did wonderful work, ended up getting sued for little mistakes? The answer is actually kind of funny because it kind of boils down to the differences between men and women. So I would say that women, first and foremost, tend to be more intuitive. We are more intuitive. We go with our guts. I say this all the time to my husband. This person just gives me a bad vibe.
But if you have a predetermined thesis, that can alter what you think you are seeing.
It is also certain that the woman in the wedding photo, so more aged on, Brigitte Trogneaux, who married Andre Louis, is not the First Lady Brigitte Macron that we see today. It is returning low probability that these are the same people. What's going on here? What do you mean it's returning low probability?
Again, same problem here. So these photos are returning lower scores. Decades in age gap between these photos, plus lots of cosmetic surgery on Brigitte of today, is returning results of 48 to 57% similar features. And by the way, if this software was so precise, so exact, why is it returning such a wide range of scores for the same person with these photos? Of 48 to 57% similar features. Candace also makes a big deal of the gap in the teeth that seem to be present in Brigitte's photos as a teacher, whereas no gap seems to exist in her teeth in this wedding photo, purported to be Brigitte. But for the wedding photo, of course, any gap might have been covered with veneers, and a formal wedding photo like this might have been touched up. Brides like to look their best in wedding photos, and photos are easy to touch up, and perhaps she chipped her tooth later. The gap we see in the teeth of the boy might be missing baby teeth that have fallen out. And actually, the gap that we see here in the teeth of the boy doesn't look like the gap that we see here in the photo of Brigitte as a teacher. So put a question mark on this, on the gap in the teeth for Brigitte as a teacher, but no gap in this wedding photo. And this apparent gap in Brigitte's teeth in this photo might be Candace's strongest evidence supporting her thesis. I suspect that they have an explanation for the gap in the teeth here and no apparent gap in the wedding photo. And as I said, I'm rooting for Candace to be right on this because this would be just such an incredible story, stranger than fiction, Black Mirror level. And I actually do think the bride photo looks quite a bit like Brigitte. Certainly could be Brigitte. And we're dealing with very low quality photos here. And then we'll have to weigh this 48 to 55% face plus facial recognition score against other evidence and proof that we'll get to in a bit. Candace says this is critical because she says today's Brigitte is not the Brigitte in the wedding photo. She will go on to build a case that the Brigitte, who the President of France is married to, stole the identity of the real Brigitte Trogneaux pictured in this wedding photo. Candace's entire case here rests on trusting the reliability of this Face++ software and her own gut instinct, which she sometimes calls female intuition. Face++ is AI-driven consumer software that has been trained primarily for social media tagging and unlocking computer devices, if provided with up-to-date, clear photos. Not for confirming identity matches between poor-quality, grainy photos decades old against recent photos of that person. Faces change with age. Skulls reshape. Bones shift, slide, and sink with age, especially in the mid-face. Old grainy photos decades old make Face++ useless when trying to match against recent photos. It's a garbage in, garbage out situation. The reason we need a new driver's license every 2 years and a new passport every 10 years is our facial features change over time. What Face++ needs to work are up-to-date, straight-on, direct photos of the face, like a driver's license or a passport. Live detection is also important for identity confirmation, which TSA uses with its facial scanners that you've seen at airports. And the most accurate identity confirmation is produced by eye scan software such as the Clear system that you see at airports. The Clear system requires you to look directly into the scanner, which then scans your eye, most notably the iris, and your iris is like a fingerprint. Clear is a private system that you can subscribe to move through security quickly. In the regular security line, TSA does use facial recognition software that does not scan the eyes the way Clear does, but the TSA system is comparing your live current face against your photo in a relatively up-to-date driver's license or passport, which is good enough for allowing you to board a plane so long as that you also have a valid photo ID and your boarding pass. The TSA system is also comparing your face against photos that it has of you in its database. And you're looking directly into the face scanner, not at an angle. And it's using live detection, you actually standing there as a live moving person looking directly into the scanner. Plus, there's a live human TSA agent there looking at the screen to make sure that everything matches. Human eyes are still actually much better than facial recognition software at recognizing human faces, unless there's a computer scan of the eyes, particularly of the iris. Facial recognition software is at best an aid to human eyes. It can sort through a lot of images very quickly and come up with candidates for matches. And just as a personal anecdote, I tried using facial recognition to access my PC, which is an option that our PC gives us, a PC equipped with Microsoft's operating system. I thought this would be a lot faster than keying in my PIN number each time. Microsoft's facial recognition capabilities is top level, but it's still very poor. It kept asking me to get closer to the camera or move farther away from the camera, and often could not get an affirmative reading. I'd be sitting there for quite a while just kind of moving back and forth from the camera, and the Microsoft facial recognition software wasn't getting an affirmative reading, so I would still have to key in my PIN number, so I disabled the facial recognition and just go directly to keying the PIN number. And this is with my PC and Microsoft having very up-to-date photos of me, plus live movement detection. Now, imagine if it had to work with static, poor-quality photos decades old, 60 years old. Face++ is just not for the purpose that Candace and Xavier are using it for. Xavier goes into how class lists at the Catholic school show that both Brigitte and Jean-Michel, her brother, were enrolled in the same school as children, a school in Amiens, France called Sacred Heart.
I then decided to go back to the archives, more specifically departmental archives, and find all the class lists. In the archives, I could see that Brigitte Trogneaux was there because, in contrast, Natasha thought that she, the real sister of Jean-Michel Trogneaux, never actually existed, but I found out she did because she was on these lists. And there was this one photo in particular from 1976, a wedding photo where you can clearly see the bride is Brigitte Trogneaux.
Jean-Michel, as I told you, born in 1945. We then know that he begins attending a Jesuit academy. We have multiple photos of him at a Jesuit academy. And I'm going to show you one of them, I believe, that we have here. Yep. So if you look there on the far right bottom, you will see that that is Jean-Michel Trogneux.
So Brigitte Trogneaux and Jean-Michel Trogneaux did exist then as two distinct individuals. It's not like one of them did not exist then and that this Brigitte identity was completely made up. And we're told that this is Brigitte here in the family photo, and this is Jean-Michel here. And now we have Xavier confirming that both these children were enrolled as children in this Catholic school in Amiens, France, and that he found them on class lists. So Xavier says that we know that both Brigitte Trogneaux and Jean-Michel Trogneaux existed as children enrolled at this Catholic school called Sacred Heart. He furthermore confirms that the bride in this wedding photo is Brigitte Trogneaux. So Xavier says, and Candace agrees, that this becomes a case of identity theft.
I concluded from this that Brigitte Macron is actually Jean-Michel Trogneaux, born in 1945 in Amiens, and that this individual assumed the identity of their sister, Brigitte Trogneaux, in 1986. So it's really a story of identity theft.
That somehow the First Lady Brigitte stole the identity of the real Brigitte Trogneaux, who is in this wedding photo. And he argues that this boy here, Jean-Michel Trogneaux, underwent gender transition at around the age of 30 and somehow stole the identity of the real Brigitte Trogneaux, who is the bride in this wedding photo. And Xavier persuaded Candace of this theory based on his belief in the reliability of Face++. But in fact, Face++ is not reliable at all for this purpose. And Candace believes that her clincher piece of evidence is this side-by-side comparison of Brigitte against Jean-Michel when Jean-Michel was 18 years old.
There were many people who had not previously engaged in the series entirely, but they saw the now infamous side-by-side of the photo of a young Jean-Michel when he was 18 years old, taken at an engineering school, next to the current French First Lady, Brigitte Macron. And they were just kind of jolted into the understanding that something was very wrong.
They do look very similar, but these are the kinds of similarities that we often see in siblings. This is common. It's normal. You know about identical twins. Well, siblings can often look very much alike. Same with similarities that we see in Brigitte and her two daughters. They're all obviously related, all obviously the daughters of Brigitte.
We are told that this guy is the extraordinarily private Jean-Michel, all grown up. Now, I can tell you right off the bat, in case you're wondering, the World Economic Forum Chinese software program says, no, that is not the Jean-Michel that we are looking for, of a little boy in the photo. I can show you this match right here. The confidence is 54%. Now, Xavier does say that when it comes to glasses, just to be super clear with you guys, that the technology doesn't want you to use two people that are wearing glasses, or glasses in general. They do caution can sometimes shade the face in a different way. But you can see here when we're showing you this, we're talking 52% confidence on the little chubby one next to him.
Candace says the software comes up with 52% confidence that they are the same people. But again, it's actually 52% similar features. And the photos are 5 or 6 decades apart. As mentioned, our facial bone structure changes significantly with age. So Face++ is useless for this purpose, comparing photos of the same person decades apart. Once you knock out the Face++ facial recognition software as not reliable at all, Candace and Xavier have nothing to support their theory about Brigitte being a transgendered female. Now let's weigh these highly unreliable Face++ results against the results of 2 defamation court cases on this, 2 court trials, plus a mountain of other evidence. In her series, Candace talks about 1 defamation trial, not the 2nd defamation trial. Now, both court cases, both trials ruled in favor of the Macrons and against Natasha Rey and Amandine Roy. Candace just focuses on this first defamation trial in Normandy, France, that Candace says, was just about a technical error made by Natasha Rey.
Well, now I'm going to tell you the details here of how Natasha Rey lost a defamation case. Not to her claim that Brigitte Macron was a man or lived as a man before transitioning, if you will, to Brigitte Macron, but rather by getting details wrong, okay? By speculating. She looked at this photo of Jean-Louise Auziere in the wedding, and she, in her mind, said, I don't think this guy ever existed. And actually, the man in that photo looks much more to me like a different guy named Louis Andre. Yeah, literally just flip the name. So you have Andre Louis in the photo. She thought that in that photo was actually Louis Andre, who is in fact his first cousin. So she speculated. She just made that assertion. Like that's not, they're just pretending, and that's whoever it is that his first cousin married. But Natasha was in fact wrong, okay?
And actually, Jean-Louis was an uncle, not a cousin. Not an important error in this context, but we want to be accurate. Natasha said that she believed that the groom in the photo was not Brigitte's ex-husband, Andre, and that the bride is not Brigitte Trogneaux. Rey theorized that this is actually the wedding photo of the uncle of Brigitte's ex-husband and his wife, Catherine. Let's hear Candace explain.
If I had to place a bet on a horse, I would have bet on Natasha Rey and her instincts. When she first saw that photo of Andre Louis at his wedding, and then she found out that he had a cousin who was named Jean-Louise, okay? So just looking at this photo, on the left there is the wedding photo, obviously the groom. On the right there is his cousin. That's Jean-Louis. So these are, I would have thought the same person. If I had just looked at these photos and trusted my own eyes, I would have totally co-signed to what Natasha Rey said.
And confusing here is that Candace shows two photos of the older gentleman, Jean-Louis, the uncle, plus the young photo of the groom here in the wedding photo, Andre Auziere. The way she presents this here is that you might be thinking the two photos of the older man are different people. No, they're the same person, the uncle, who Candace keeps saying is the cousin of the ex-husband. He's actually an uncle. And one photo of this uncle is a close-up of his face, the other is from farther away. And Candace should have made that clearer here, perhaps with labeling, because this is confusing for the watcher. I had to watch this clip several times before I figured this out, that the older gentlemen are the same people. It's an easy mistake perhaps for Natasha to make, but it's not just a technical or insignificant error, as Candace claims. In fact, this mistake, this error by Natasha, shatters the entire thesis. The court ruled that Natasha Rey and her podcast host, Amandine Roy, did defame Jean-Louis and his wife, Catherine. They were not the ones in the wedding photo. The court ruled that the wedding photo was indeed Brigitte Trogneaux and her ex-husband, Jean-Louis Auziere. And documentary proof was supplied to the court: marriage records, birth records, electoral voter cards, whatever the court required to confirm identities. And remember, Candace and Xavier are arguing that this is a case of identity theft. So the court requires documentary proof to confirm identities. This wedding photo also comes from a newspaper clip announcing the marriage. So that's pretty strong documentary proof. And the defendants, Natasha Rey and Amandine Roy, were fined €2,000 each by the court. And the fine was later reduced due to the precarious finances of the defendants. If the photo is authentic and the couple in the photo is indeed Brigitte and her ex-husband Andre being married in 1974, then Brigitte cannot have transitioned from male to female because she's female here. Unless you think that Brigitte is transgendered here. But no one is alleging that. And we have 3 children from this marriage between Brigitte and Andre. Children named Tiphaine, Laurence, and Sebastian, certified by government birth records. And we have Tiphaine as an outspoken public defender of her mom, Brigitte. The authenticity of this photo has been confirmed by a court based on documentary proof required by the court and duly supplied, because the court case was all about the authenticity of this wedding photo. And as we saw, Xavier confirms that both Brigitte Trogneaux and her brother Jean-Michel were enrolled at that same Catholic school in Amiens, France. So these were 2 separate and distinct individuals then. Therefore, we have no reason to disbelieve the official account that this little girl right here is Brigitte Trogneaux. And Xavier and Candace now admit that the man in this wedding photo is indeed the ex-husband, Jean-Louise Auziere. and that the bride in this wedding photo is indeed Brigitte Trogneux. Candace also says that the existence of the brother Jean-Michel as a child is confirmed. Both Candace and Xavier admit this. So what Candace and Xavier must argue, and are in fact arguing, is that this is a case of identity theft. That this boy here stole the identity of Brigitte Trogneux, this girl here and in this wedding photo here, underwent gender transition at about the age of 30 and became Brigitte. Okay, then what happened to the real Brigitte Macron Auziere? Candace seems to suggest that maybe she was murdered or made to disappear somehow. So was she put in a convent or put in a witness protection program and given a new identity? And would the rest of the real Brigitte's family, the Trogneux family, think all this was just fine? Would they not notice that the real Brigitte went missing? And what about all of Brigitte's childhood friends? Wouldn't some of them wonder what happened to their friend, the real Brigitte? And do you need to steal an existing person's identity to transition? That seems super complicated. Why not just transition and pick a new name? And where did Brigitte's 3 children come from? Brigitte is confirmed as the mother of these 3 children by birth records. The more you try to hang with Candace and Xavier's theory and go down this rabbit hole with Candace, the more crazy this gets. Candace tells us here that the cousin, who's actually the uncle of the ex-husband, was manipulated into filing this defamation suit on a promise that Brigitte would be joining in this lawsuit. Candace contends that Brigitte expressed enthusiasm for this defamation suit and said that she would be joining him in this suit. Candace then says Brigitte backed out. Candace quotes here from the reporting of a journalist who talked to the uncle, Jean-Louise.
The cousin calls up Brigitte, and here is what he tells the journalist happened next in his own words. Quote, Brigitte tells me she's sorry and that it's all her fault, that we need to press charges, and that she agrees to file a joint action. I hear Emmanuel Macron's voice in the background asking him to hurry up because they must leave. Before hanging up, she promises to send me a copy of her family record book, which she didn't. I also asked her to certify in writing, which she did, pardon. I also asked her to certify in writing that it was her in the 1974 wedding photo with Andre, which she didn't. I did not speak to her directly on the subject after that. So again, he says, she's like, yeah, no, file. I'm going to file with you. Do this. Afterwards, he makes good on his side of the deal. He files a complaint against Natasha Rey. He sends documents to Brigitte's lawyers. Brigitte then calls him back and says, you know what? Actually, the palace is recommending that we file our actions separately. Here's what Jean-Louise says happens next. Quote, she told me that the Élysée preferred to launch 2 separate actions. She was walking out on me, it clearly meant. It clearly meant if you want to continue, you're on your own. Get a lawyer of your own. We had already filed a complaint. There was no turning back, so we went ahead on our own. Since then, when I tried to call Brigitte back, I don't get through to her, but to her secretary, who has become unreachable. So long story short, the first lady played him, right? She got him all fired up and said, file, we're going to file with you, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, can you certify that? And nope, they were manipulated, and then they were betrayed by the presidential couple. And the journalist recounts that you can definitely tell that he's a bit stung, that the Auzieres felt a bit stung by that.
Well, from Candace's account here, quoting from the journalist, it does sound like Brigitte expressed enthusiasm for Jean-Louise's lawsuit, and it sounds like she indicated she would be joining in the legal action in some fashion. Candace says that Brigitte backed out of the legal action. She says that Jean-Louise felt betrayed by this. But the palace lawyers are correct in terms of legal strategy. It would make absolutely no legal sense for Brigitte and Jean-Michel to join in this lawsuit of the uncle of the ex-husband. Instead, she and her brother would be filing their own separate defamation lawsuit against Natasha Rey and Amandine Roy. And that's exactly what happened. And Candace makes no mention of this second defamation lawsuit and trial in her 7 hours of videos in her 8-part series. This court case, this second trial, took place in Paris. And this second defamation trial also confirmed the identity of Brigitte Macron, plus confirmed the identity of her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneaux. Again, Brigitte and her brother Jean-Michel were the plaintiffs. Candace keeps saying that Brigitte and Jean-Michel never filed a lawsuit, never engaged in a court case.
She will not join a lawsuit and assert formally by just saying, that is me in the photo.
And in this second court case, this second defamation trial, documentary evidence was provided, such as birth records, electoral cards, and other documentary proof sufficient to persuade the court that they are who they say they are. They are distinct and separate individuals still living and breathing today. And as part of this second defamation trial, the second defamation court case, Natasha Rey compiled a 48-page dossier that contends that the wedding announcements for the 1974 marriage of Andre to Brigitte are fake or manufactured. The court rejected Natasha's contention as false, proven by documentary marriage records, birth records, electoral voting cards, and other official documents, and by the fact that Brigitte and Jean-Michel are still living, breathing people. They are distinct individuals.
She will not join a lawsuit and assert formally by just saying, that is me in the photo, okay? She will not answer my questions as we've had our legal team go out and we have said, we don't want to lie. Just like Xavier, we're not here in the business to spread lies, okay? Doesn't help me. Doesn't make my audience want to come back to my show when I get busted intentionally lying and defaming someone for the sheer sport of it.
So the Paris court concluded on September 12, 2024, that the two defendants, Amandine Roy and Natasha Rey, had defamed Brigitte and Jean-Michel and were ordered to pay a total of 8,000 euros in damages to Brigitte Macron and 5,000 in damages to her brother Jean-Michel Trogneaux. Additionally, they received a suspended fine of $500 each. Now, it does seem like these are relatively low damage awards imposed by the courts against Natasha and Amandine, and that suggests to me that the courts were not trying to ruin Natasha and Amandine. Though 8,000 euros, I'm sure, is a lot of money for these women, these ladies who are by no means wealthy. It also suggests to me that these courts did not see these two ladies as malicious. Natasha had her suspicions, had her gut feeling, and went down this rabbit hole, as Candace continues to do now. And because this 1974 wedding photo has been proven by two courts to be authentic, the two people in this wedding photo indeed being Andre and Brigitte, with all the necessary documentary proof, Candace and Xavier have to weave this other story that Brigitte Trogneaux has gone missing, and that her identity was stolen by Brigitte, who is currently married to the President of France, who Candace contends is, in reality, this boy here, Jean-Michel Trogneaux, who transitioned at about the age of 30 and became Brigitte. Candace will go on to suggest that Brigitte might even be the father of President Emmanuel Macron.
These families might all be related. Are the Auzieres, the Trogneux, and the Macrons all just from the same family? Is there a chance that Brigitte Macron, some of you asked, is actually the father of Emmanuel Macron?
We'll get into her case for that in a bit. Now let's get to how Candace handles the clear and photographic video proof of Jean-Michel's presence at the 2017 and 2022 inaugurations of President Macron. And it's wild how she tries to do this.
First thing that I should note is that in both of these inaugurations, the Jean-Michel is not standing with the family for Macron's speeches, okay? Not at either inauguration. In the 2017 inauguration, here's a still. He is standing with a bunch of priests, okay? And when you watch the footage, the family is all walking together as they go down the line and say hi to people. And Laurent, that would be Brigitte's quote unquote daughter, speaks to him very briefly. They're all saying hi. It's like you got to kind of walk through and say hi. The family is walking down, and he's greeted 2 kisses on the cheek by Emmanuel Macron, but he's not standing with his family.
Candace notes here that Jean-Michel is not sitting at this table with Brigitte, a lunch following the inauguration.
Something that's also interesting is that Jean-Claude, his alleged big brother, who he wasn't standing with or anything, was also present on this inauguration day. And yet Jean-Claude, at the luncheon which followed this speech, was seated at a table with his siblings. He was seated, Jean-Claude was seated with Brigitte. Here is a photo of that luncheon, okay? not Jean-Michel, not the person they allege is Jean-Michel. For whatever reason, he was not seated with his siblings, not sitting down at this table with his relatives, not sitting down with his brother, not sitting down with Brigitte.
But this is a very small table. Maybe he's at another table.
That's her brother. That's supposed to be Jean-Michel. Okay. They won't answer that for sure, but that's supposed to be who they're trying to make us believe is her brother. Nothing said. Emmanuel, Brigitte just completely, there's the frame where they're trying to she's right there with her brother. Says not a word. Okay. You can go back and watch this. I did not make this up. Look, it just walks right by. Who would do this to their brother on Inauguration Day?
Maybe he just saw his sister. Didn't need to greet her again. Let others greet her, who maybe haven't seen her in a long time. Maybe there's a family gathering after this. He'll see the Macrons then. Here we see President Macron greet Brigitte's brother, Jean-Michel.
Emmanuel Macron now. I feel like if I was in the presence of my brother-in-law, I'd feel like I must go up to him first, right? I better go up to him first. And then Emmanuel's like, oh, okay, I have to say something, a little friendly, goodbye, and that's it.
Candace notes how perfunctory this greeting is. Shakes hands, says hello, moves on, and that's it. While Macron is much more effusive with others. Well, what if Macron had just seen Jean-Michel, Brigitte's brother? Perhaps he'd been with him earlier or the day before. If you haven't seen somebody for a long time, you'd be a lot more effusive in your greeting than if you had just seen that person and talked with that person. We just don't know the social or family dynamic here. But Candace jumps to a lot of conclusions. And also, this is a pretty small event for President Macron. Only people close to the Macrons would be at an event like this right after the inauguration. So clearly, Jean-Michel is considered part of the president's small gathering of family and friends. Candace makes a big deal here that Jean-Michel is standing next to David Rothschild.
Okay, now let's pause that frame. Who's he standing with? Let's back up a little bit if you can, Mark. See that guy in the background? You want to know who he's standing with? David Rothschild. Jean-Michel is standing with David Rothschild. What's his relation to David Rothschild? Why is he standing there? And please just make sense of it. Again, I'm just a regular old person. I got nothing but street smarts, but I got to tell you, my entire family is all the way down there. And I've decided not to sit with them, not to stand with them, but to be by myself with security and David Rothschild. Ladies and gentlemen, what the hell is going on?
Well, President Macron used to work at the Rothschild Bank. So it would be natural for David Rothschild to be in attendance at this gathering, and quite likely that Jean-Michel would end up standing next to very powerful and wealthy people at a small gathering of the President of France's family, friends, and biggest financial supporters. And also, Jean-Michel Trogneaux is quite wealthy in his own right. The Trogneaux family built, own, and run a renowned chocolate business that has been around since 1872 called Jean Trogneaux. So this Trogneaux chocolate business has been in existence for 153 years, spanning 6 or 7 generations. The Trogneaux are a wealthy family. We don't know the exact scale of their wealth because it's a privately held company, but the Trogneaux family likely has substantial wealth, which is probably one reason why he's standing next to David Rothschild. Candace keeps saying how little we know about Jean-Michel Trogneaux. Jean-Michel Trogneaux has been actively involved in running the business. He's had a leadership role. Though I believe he's mostly retired now, he's still involved. And it's very common for wealthy people who are not public figures to keep a very low profile. Often they're hyper-private. Wealthy people don't want to be targets of blackmail, extortion, kidnapping. So Jean-Michel is very low-key here, in keeping with the practice and tradition of the Trogneaux family, and as is common practice among very wealthy people. Candace is unable to explain the presence of Jean-Michel at these events if he's supposed to be Brigitte, according to Candace. So she has to spin out these incredibly contorted theories. I do believe in Occam's razor in most cases. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. Now let's talk about Brigitte's ex-husband, André Louis, because Candace is obsessed with him. Candace spends a lot of time on this. Candace keeps saying that we know so little about the ex-husband's professional life. But we do know that he had a career in banking, that he worked at Banque Françoise du Commerce. André died in December of 2019 at the age of 68. We're told in official accounts that he died in a hospital after a long illness. Candace says he died in a psychiatric institution, citing an article in Paris Match. This article also says he was suffering from depression and was reclusive. She suggests that age 68 is very young to just die, hinting that he might have been murdered. But people do die in their 60s all the time, and he was a smoker. Tiphaine, the daughter, told Paris Match, quote, "My father died. I buried him on December 24th in strictest privacy." She says, quote, "I adored him. He was a being apart, a nonconformist who valued his anonymity more than anything." Candace believes that the fact that the Macrons waited 9 months to tell us that Brigitte's ex-husband had died and that there had only been a small private funeral is suspicious.
Suddenly, Tiphaine, the second daughter, announces in a weekly magazine that actually her dad already died a year ago, actually, in 2019. People are starting to pry. And now she's like, actually, he's dead. He died a year ago. Here is the quote that was published in Paris Match announcing that. Tiphaine said, "My father died. I buried him on December 24th, 2019 in the strictest privacy." How convenient. How convenient, right? That, like, I don't know, the first lady's first husband, who everybody's starting to look into, just drops dead right at the moment where people realize something's going on here. I would say it's remarkably convenient for the Macron family.
Candace says that the funeral of the ex-husband was executed, quote, like a thief in the night.
The strangest thing being that the Élysée Palace was involved, okay? They wanted to see to it that this funeral was executed like a thief in the night. They did not want the public to learn about this.
But Brigitte, remember, left André, her ex-husband, for young Macron in 1994, 25 years prior. André, her ex-husband, was really no longer in her life. And maybe the Macrons were not especially interested in shining the media spotlight on the death of her ex-husband. After all, Brigitte had left André to pursue an affair with her student, who she had seduced when he was 14 or 15 years old, then married him. Why would the Macrons want to dig all that up again? Why would they want to shine a media spotlight on all that? His daughter Tiphaine mentioned this in answer to a question. No reason to announce it. But actually, by all accounts, Brigitte maintained a cordial relationship with her ex-husband, even though the marriage broke up over her affair with her 15-year-old student. Candace says that Brigitte did not attend the funeral of her ex-husband. Tiphaine says that Brigitte did attend the funeral. And Tiphaine says that she, Tiphaine, made the funeral arrangements. Throughout her 8-part series, throughout her 7 hours of videos on this, Candace is obsessed by how few photos of André we have. Candace claims that all photos of André were destroyed. In fact, throughout her whole video series, Candace is constantly claiming that the photographic record of the family was destroyed. And she implies destroyed by handlers of the Macrons, implying a cover-up. But she offers no proof that the photographic record of André's life was destroyed, or that the photographic record of anybody else's life was destroyed by the Macrons. Before the digital age, really before smartphones and Facebook, most people had very few photos of themselves. I have this photo from my childhood, me with my mom at age 7. Here's a photo of me when I was about 11 with the St. Bernard. Here's a photo of me ski racing when I was about 17. And that's about it for photos of me when I was young. People just didn't have many photos back then. Photos were a chore to take and collect. If you had a camera, you bought rolls of film. A roll of film allowed you to take 10 snapshots. Then you would mail this roll of film somewhere to get the photos developed. Then you would get the photos back in the mail in 2 weeks or a month. So people didn't take a lot of photos back then, before the digital age, because taking photos was such a pain in the ass. Candace grew up in the digital age, so it might be hard for her to imagine that people just didn't take a lot of photos back then. And we tend to lose photos as we move through life. You really have to make a concerted effort to keep photos, even in the digital age. The only photos I keep are photos that I put on Facebook. I use Facebook mainly for photo storage. Other than that, I don't keep photos. But Candace keeps coming back to the fact that we have so few photos of Jean-Louise Auziere, and very few or no photos of Brigitte before she was a teacher. Plus, in fact, many photos might exist, but Brigitte and the Trogneux family choose not to share them with the public. Perfectly normal and reasonable, especially for a very wealthy family, not to share their photos all over the internet. And the reason for the divorce was she had seduced her 15-year-old student, Emmanuel Macron. then left Andre, her husband, for Emmanuel Macron. Do people keep photos of their ex-spouses? I guess some people do. I've kept no photos of my ex-wife, even though we were married for 17 years. I doubt she kept any photos of me. No reason to. What's the point of keeping photos of your ex-spouse around? What are you supposed to do? Sit around and look at photos of your ex-wife with your current wife? Candace mocks this photo of Andre, the ex-husband, that was used in the funeral announcement. This photo of Andre in his swimsuit on the beach. She finds the photo odd and inappropriate.
And I will tell you, it is a very odd choice for an obituary photo. Here it is. Now, even for a far-left journalist who is not prone to conspiracy theories, even for Emmanuel Auzere, it seemed to her to be a very weird choice for a photo for a death announcement. So she asked him flat out, like, this is weird. What's going on with this choice of a photo? What? So all that's left for a man's life in pictures, apart from his wedding photo, is a photo of him in a swimsuit to illustrate his final departure? She asks in her book. Yeah, somehow every other photo from his life had been destroyed. Okay.
I don't think it's odd at all. If he was suffering from depression, and if Candace is correct that he died in a psychiatric hospital, this is a photo that shows a happy time. Here he is walking on the beach in his swim trunks looking pretty fit. I wouldn't mind being remembered this way. Nothing suspicious about this photo being used at his funeral in my view, especially if it's one of the few photos they had access to. Candace expresses surprise that Brigitte did not attend her ex-husband's funeral. But her daughter Tiphaine says she did attend. Either way, it's indicative of nothing. I don't expect my ex-wife to attend my funeral if I die first. Candace makes a big deal about apparent what she thinks are conflicting accounts of Andre, the ex-husband, being buried or cremated.
Also, by the way, this is kind of weird, but Tiphaine announcing her dad's death in that Paris Match magazine. Well, what's even stranger is that Tiphaine got the details wrong about her dad's death. Yeah, isn't that really weird? One, he was not buried at all. He was cremated.
Andre's cousin, or uncle, allegedly says he was cremated. Andre's daughter Tiphaine says he was buried at a small private funeral with close family in attendance. And there's no conflict at all between being cremated and buried. People are often cremated and then buried with their ashes in an urn or a box. This is just normal. Now let's talk about how Candace concludes that President Macron might have married his transgendered father, who died in 2010. So Candace, I guess, concludes that he didn't really die in 2010, that he transgendered into Brigitte and married his son, Emmanuel Macron. That's a possibility that Candace is putting out there. Candace supports this thesis by pointing to a TV interview with a transgendered woman who goes by the name Veronique. Candace shows a shadowy figure to hide her identity, the woman here being interviewed on TV. Candace says this person named Veronique sounds exactly like Brigitte with the same verbal tic, often saying, "that is to say." But looking at her side profile here, she doesn't look to me at all like Brigitte. This person has a much rounder chin, nose not similar either, shape of face not similar. Okay, let's continue.
Jumping back into this timeline, we then know that the real Brigitte Trogneaux marries Jean-Louise Auziere, becoming Brigitte Auziere. We have a wedding announcement. We have a wedding photo. It actually happened. And that is the photo which Natasha Rey made an unfortunate and totally understandable mistake regarding. And then, like I told you, for whatever reason, Jean-Michel photographically disappears. He disappears. And then this amazing thing happens in 1977 when people started recognizing that their first lady, something about this story didn't make sense. When people began first speaking about their suspicions that they were looking at a transitioned man for many reasons, they were able to dig up an interview, okay, from 1977. And it's a man who says that he is transitioned and living as a woman named Veronique. Every person that speaks, you can transition your name, you can try to speak in a different tone, but you have tics, almost things that you say that you don't even recognize that you say, words that you might rely on. And for First Lady Macron, that tick, so to speak, is she says, that is to say, right? That is to say. Some people might say like. You know, like I was going to like the store and like her tick is that is to say, that is to say. So I'm going to play a little bit of this interview. Of course, it is in French, so this will mean nothing to English listeners, but then I'm going to read you the transcript because there's some other important coincidences that happened. Take a listen.
Je crois qu'en fait, il n'y a pas transformation parce que le psychisme est déjà féminin.
So the interviewer asks, he says to the audience, I can only guarantee the authenticity of Veronique's testimony.
I did not hear the speech tick in Candace's translation, but even if it is in there, that phrase, that is to say, is a very common phrase for French-speaking people. I hear the French use that phrase all the time. Candace says that someone used an AI voice analysis app and says that this person 100% is Brigitte.
And she has, after somebody used an AI voice analysis, they said that this was 100% the same person.
But Candace does not show this. What is this AI voice analysis software? Who is the person who analyzed it? Is this just something she saw on X? And here's Candace explaining.
And, you know, I don't know much about these softwares, but for somebody to come out and to declare that this is 100% the same person, and the only difference is that the voice has aged to have the same tics, it's a lot of coincidences. It was major when this happened and when this was revealed.
She basically says she doesn't know. She calls the source of the AI voice analysis claim as just somebody. Probably something she saw on X. So somebody said this, and she's not very familiar with these softwares. And Candace says that another point of significance in that TV interview with that person named Veronique is that in 1980, Jean-Michel marries a woman named Veronique Drew.
When we jump back into our Jean-Michel Trogneaux timeline, we find that at this time, Jean-Michel Trogneaux, following this interview, marries a woman. And ironically, her name is Veronique. So, could it be possible that Jean-Michel took on the name of a dear friend named Veronique, who he was living with and who he then moved to marry? We don't know because, of course, there are no pictures of this wedding. There's nothing there. Jean-Michel Trogneaux on paper gets married to a woman named Veronique Drew.
Candace thinks it's interesting that Jean-Michel's new wife is named Veronique. That unidentified trans woman on TV in that interview also used the name Veronique. Candace thinks that's very coincidental. I don't know, is Veronique an unusual name in France? Candace points to no photographic record of this wedding as being significant.
What is going on? Seriously, what is going on in this story? What is happening? How do we have these actors who are unable to produce images from these very relevant things that happened in their lives? You know, where is Jean-Michel Trogneaux? You got married to a woman. Are there no pictures from your wedding day?
But maybe we just don't have access to the photos. Wanda and I got married at a courthouse in 2006. I think we have one photo from that, and we had no family in attendance. We just went and got married one day. There were a lot of people in the courthouse that day getting married in exactly the same way. Jean-Michel and Veronique have two children, one named Valerie, another named Jean-Jacques, and they divorced in 1987. Candace claims that this Jean-Jacques, one of the children from this marriage, looks a lot like Emmanuel Macron, and he certainly does.
Then what happens next is it's recorded that Jean-Michel Trogneaux and Veronique Drew had a child, Jean-Jacques Trogneaux. That is the child that we showed you that looks almost identical to Emmanuel Macron. It's really hard to convince me that these two people are not related, but they're not, guys, not according to the official legend. They're definitely not married. That's Brigitte's side of the family. And then 2 years later, Jean-Michel Trogneaux and Veronique Drew have a daughter, Valerie.
This is where we get to Candace's theory that Emmanuel Macron might be married to his transitioned father.
These families might all be related. Are the Auzieres, the Trogneux, and the Macrons all just from the same family? Is there a chance that Brigitte Macron, some of you asked, is actually the father of Emmanuel Macron?
And Xavier manages to get in touch with Veronique on WhatsApp. They arrange to have a phone call. And Candace, quoting from Xavier's book here, says that Xavier had a conversation on the phone with Veronique that lasted about 30 minutes. Here's Candace on that, quoting from Xavier's book.
The journalist Xavier Poussard contacted her. So from his book, he writes this in first person. So I was looking to contact Veronique Drew. What was the materiality of her marriage to Jean-Michel Trogneaux? That is where I found her number. I contacted on WhatsApp. She agreed to get back to me the next day and did so. Our conversation lasted half an hour. Even though she repeats the wording often heard from the Trogneaux entourage, example, "Those women are crazy," referring to Natasha Rey and Amandine Roy, she first pretends not to know what the call was about. About Jean-Michel becoming Brigitte, right? Listen, sir, I don't know. It's ridiculous anyway, because I have 2 children with Jean-Michel. I saw on YouTube that they made a family tree where they even put that I might be Macron's mother. Veronique Drew is, of course, referring to questions raised by internet users about the uncanny physical resemblance between Emmanuel Macron, the husband of Brigitte, and Jean-Jacques Trogneaux, the son of Jean-Michel Trogneaux. She goes on and says, "Listen, sir, I have been divorced from Jean-Michel Trogneaux for many years. Listen, sir, I have remarried and my children are here. I don't want any problems, but I can tell you that Jean-Michel is not Brigitte. That's ridiculous. I had 2 chocolate stores in Beauvais. Well, I had 2 children. It didn't work out, so I went back to live with my mom, and that's all. But I can tell you that Jean-Michel is not Brigitte." Xavier says, "I take her at her word, and I ask her for photos of her shared past with Jean-Michel Trogneaux, promising that if they are conclusive, to close the case without even publishing those photos." Veronique Drew says to him, "Brigitte told me not to get involved. I don't want any trouble about my children or about, it's not relevant to the family anymore." As I, Xavier, argue that she should hold Brigitte Macron to account because it's because of her silence that her own photo, as well as the photo of her children, Jean-Jacques in particular, are circulating on social networks. She cuts me off and inexplicably blurts out, "And also, I know Macron's father. Well, I don't know him very well, but he was a surgeon at the Amiens hospital, but I didn't know Emmanuel Macron. We lived in Toulon. I didn't even know him. I saw him at my daughter's wedding, the first time I had ever seen him."
Candace finds this suspicious for some reason. So Xavier says that this photo is circulating on social networks. That's where he got this photo. Therefore, this photo has not been verified at all. And Xavier is trying to verify this photo. That's one of the purposes of his call to Veronique. So this photo, which Xavier Poussard says here is circulating among internet users, purports to be the son of Jean-Michel and Veronique. She says she's remarried and her children are there. She dismisses these questions as absurd and the entire thesis as ridiculous. Xavier asks if he can see photos of the children. She says she'll get back to him and politely gets off the phone, and she won't return Xavier's phone calls. And this is perfectly reasonable behavior on the part of Veronique. Why would this mom share photos of her children with a stranger who is asking bizarre questions about one of her children? And this is Candace's own evidence, the evidence that she's presenting. Candace keeps asking throughout all these videos, why won't the Macrons answer her questions? Why won't they just present the brother, Jean-Michel, with Brigitte standing side by side? But of course, they are seen together at 2 inaugurations of President Macron in 2017 and 2022. And why is the burden on the Macrons to prove that Brigitte Macron is not transgendered? With such a fantastical and outrageous theory that Candace and Xavier are presenting here, the burden of proof is on them, not on the Macrons. Why would President Macron or President Trump or any head of state spend any time answering questions about something like this?
Please just answer our 21 questions. Because the Macrons dispute the substance of Candace's reporting and opinions, we would like to provide them with the opportunity to present their stories and to clear up any rumors in the press. As such, we offer any date and time during the months of January, February, and March of 2025 for an interview between Candace and your clients. Candace, her producer, and a videographer will fly to Europe and arrange for a translator and studio in which the Macrons can answer questions.
It would just give publicity to the claims. Why is the burden on them to answer questions from a foreign podcaster? But Candace seems to think it's really weird that the Macrons don't want to talk to a foreign podcaster about whether or not Brigitte is transgender. And imagine if you're the Macrons hearing this thesis, knowing for a fact what the truth is. What must the Macrons be thinking? How did this rumor ever get started, they must be wondering. Let's see, your President Macron and some podcaster from America is saying, at a minimum, that he's married to a biological male transgendered to female, the brother of Brigitte Macron, and that this Brigitte Macron is really not Brigitte Trogneaux, that this Brigitte, the First Lady Brigitte, stole the identity of the real Brigitte Trogneaux. That's what Candace is saying. But it's possible that Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, is married to his transitioned father. So if you're President Macron or Brigitte Macron and listening to all this, to what really amounts to just 7 hours of innuendo, are you going to sit down for an interview with this podcaster as Candace is demanding? I mean, imagine looking at this from the perspective of the Macrons. The President of France knowing for a fact that he did not marry Jean-Michel transgendered and did not marry a transgendered version of his father. As Candace proudly tells us, she and Natasha Rey go with their gut, go with their female intuition. But that's really the problem. She goes with her gut. Now that's fine for starting your inquiry. Something in your gut doesn't look right here. So maybe you investigate to see what's up. But what you should not do is put out 7 hours of videos that get 16 million views accusing the First Lady of France of being trans when you really have zero evidence that she is. Just your gut, just your female intuition. And I mean zero evidence, not even a shred. And I'm somebody who's rooting for Candace. I like Candace. I would love it if her theory were true because it would have been just such an incredible story. And everyone loves incredible stories. I went into this somewhat prepared to believe Candace. I would have loved to have done videos backing up Candace's theory. But the more I listened to her 8-part, 7-hour series, the more I had doubts. She was debunking herself with her own evidence that she was providing in these videos. I didn't really even have to do a lot of outside research beyond what she was presenting here in her videos. I did some, but mostly I'm just relying on the evidence that she's presenting here. And I have no dog in this hunt whatsoever. I'm not for the Macrons or against the Macrons. Though Brigitte's daughter Tiphaine sounds super nice, and she's so well composed, so well spoken, so dignified. So I really like her. So Candace has her gut feelings and her suspicions that are presented over 7 hours of video. And we have to stack Candace's gut feelings and suspicions against this wedding photo that has now been authenticated by 2 courts in 2 defamation trials. And then there are Brigitte's 3 children who appear to be on very good terms with Brigitte. Tiphaine has been the one that has been speaking out most publicly in defense of her mom. We have birth records, marriage records, voter ID cards, and so forth. Newspaper announcements of weddings. There is photographic and video proof of the brother Jean-Michel in attendance at President Macron's inaugurations, both inaugurations in 2017 and 2022, including at small, exclusive private functions with the president's family, friends, and biggest financial backers, where he can be seen in video, greeted by President Macron, and standing and moving next to David Rothschild. This is all in Candace's own 8-part video presentation. So sadly, Candace's theory is not true, provably untrue. And I say sadly because I love incredible stories. The more bizarre, the more sick and twisted, the better. I don't think that Candace is lying on purpose here. I don't think she's lying. I think she's just mistaken.
Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
Another theme of my YouTube channel is that people can be brainwashed to believe almost anything. She has brainwashed herself to believe this. She says the Macrons, the propaganda media, and the deep state are gaslighting us. Now, the propaganda news is gaslighting the public about a lot of things, gaslights us every day about things, gaslit us into lockdowns and mandates on COVID. We were gaslit about the Russia collusion hoax concerning Donald Trump in 2016, 2017. That was all a lie. The propaganda news gaslights us every day about something or other. But in this case, Candace is gaslighting herself. And I think that Candace is realizing, perhaps subconsciously, that she really doesn't have the goods here. And here's Candace desperately pleading with her massive audience to send her evidence that might support her story, support her theory. And she sounds pretty panicked here. I think that even she suspects that what she's been saying just isn't true.
Maybe you are in the French military and you see something strange about access to his files, because there is a file. There is a military file that is being locked down as it pertains to Jean-Michel Trogneaux. And they just want to gaslight us about that. He's just so private. So private, but he does go to the inauguration, but so private he doesn't want to stand with the family or be involved with them. He'd rather stand with David de Rothschild. Help me out, guys.
And I'm putting up this video not to attack Candace. I'm a big Candace fan. My goal is to inspire her to do better because she has so much talent. But what do you think of all this? Where do you stand? I'd like to read all your comments on this. And please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as this helps with the algorithm. And be sure to follow me on X. I'm posting all the time. And that's all I have for you today. Hope to see you back here for the next video. Here are a couple of books of mine that you might want to check out, both available on Amazon in all the formats. One is Bitcoin, A Beginner's Guide, Your Off-Ramp from the Corrupt Political System and Protection from Economic Collapse. And the other book is Win Life, Success Skills Schools Don't Teach.